Sex is a battlefield. Animals will go to every extreme to mate and ensure their survival. Without sex, a species is history. Its genes a dead end. From violent couplings to sperm wars, to mating rituals, and finally, amazingly, to love. Sex drives evolution, and evolution drives sex. In nature, it really is all about sex. Just off the coast of Bimini Island in the Bahamas, scientists are studying a marvel of evolution. Over millions of years, evolution has built the protruding jaw and razor-sharp teeth of the ocean's master predator. But sharks are more than just killing machines. They are pioneers of sex.
500 million years ago, sharks really invented what people would call sex.
Sam Gruber has studied sharks for 45 years.
People basically don't know much about sharks, and they think of them as the death fish from hell, but really they're highly, highly sophisticated, tremendous animals.
In addition to complex navigation and communication systems, sharks were one of the first to develop a whole new way to have sex.
May not look like very much, but it represents a huge evolutionary leap in reproductive behavior. If you look very closely, you'll see these two little finger-like projections, which are called claspers, are actually the penis of the male shark.
400 million years ago, sharks became one of the first vertebrates to evolve a penis. But they were hardly the last. Over millions of years, the penis proved so valuable that it evolved independently in animals as different as insects, birds, and reptiles.
The penis is a good example of convergent evolution because it serves one purpose, but it's arisen in many different ways in a variety of organisms.
But how did the penis become so vital? 700 million years ago, sharks, fish, and other vertebrates have yet to evolve. Sea life is instead comprised of simple, single-celled creatures. To pass on their genes, they don't have to partner up. They can reproduce by themselves.
Reproduction before sex was all asexual. Asexual reproduction means that you just make copies of yourself and send them off into the environment. They have all of your genes and no one else's.
Asexual reproduction does guarantee that 100% of an organism's genes are passed on. But on the evolutionary battlefield, this strategy has one serious flaw. When each and every creature shares the exact same genes, they also share the same genetic weak spots.
Imagine that a virus shows up on the scene, and that virus attacks you if you have a very specific gene sequence in your DNA. Now, if everyone in your population has the same DNA, that means that that virus is going to wipe everyone out.
But with sexual reproduction, the mixing and matching of genes increases the odds of at least some individuals living on. The secret to survival is sex. The first animals to adopt sexual reproduction emerged 600 million years ago. But the sex they practiced is not what humans might imagine. These passive creatures, relatives of modern coral, were tightly anchored to the sea floor. How can you mate when you can't move? Cast sperm and eggs on the waves and hope they meet. Each summer, billions of coral polyps simultaneously launch their reproductive cells into the current. Each coral releases both sperm and egg, but instead of combining with each other, they wait until they encounter the seeds of another coral. No one knows how they do it. This mass spawning is one of nature's most arresting spectacles. But it evolved as a matter of survival.
Mass spawning by corals could be called a defense mechanism. Having all of the eggs and sperm released at the same time allows some of the offspring to survive even when there are predators around. You swamp the predators, you produce so many that they can't all be eaten by those predators at that point in time.
For stationary animals, casting DNA into the ocean may have been the only way to sexually reproduce. But a new class of creatures was about to evolve, and sex would evolve with them.
About 570 million years ago, in a very brief period of time, we see the origin of many different, often very complex body forms, some of which are still with us today. Many forms that resemble modern invertebrates, crustaceans. We even see the first fish.
These early fish could move like no other creatures that came before. Instead of relying on ocean currents to carry their fate, males could directly target the female's eggs with their sperm. But even this method of mating had its pitfalls. The eggs, once fertilized, were not only tiny and fragile, they were exposed. This forced the parents to either stand guard or abandon them altogether. It would take another 200 million years for evolution to come up with a new plan, which is where sharks come in. In sharks, evolution gave rise to an innovation that allowed males to deploy sperm directly inside the females.
Sharks invented sex, so to speak. This is just a huge difference from what we see in animals that lived a half a billion years ago. Instead of two fish just randomly spraying their eggs and sperms out into the water, helter-skelter, these animals have to actually come in contact.
Sharks are one of the first vertebrates to physically connect during sex. It may sound friendly, but with sharks, it's anything but.
Cute guys, right? The male will bite her pectoral fin, her arm fin, and roll her over. Then the male has these two claspers, or peni, and one is rotated around while the other stays back, and that's inserted into the female's cloaca, which is the common duct.
This vertical hold may look brutal, but biologically speaking, it's a thing of beauty.
It looks to me like a ballet because they have very difficult tasks to go through to bring themselves together.
Each seemingly violent act has a necessary sexual function. The male flips the female shark to her back to relax her for penile insertion. He sinks his teeth into her skin to trigger her ovulation. She's even protected from his gashing.
Female sharks have skin twice as thick as male sharks. They have amazing healing properties. They can have huge lacerations, which would kill a human, and they're perfectly fine with it.
But the crucial innovation of shark sex is the penis. Once the male is firmly attached, a spur at the appendage's tip prevents it from slipping out. A sac in the male's abdomen fills with seawater and propels the sperm directly into the female's womb, where eggs await fertilization.
So not only did they invent copulation, but they also invented getting pregnant. That is to say, internal fertilization. This represents a whole new stage in reproductive biology.
Internal fertilization has been a foundation of sharks' 400 million year reign as the ocean's top predators. Not only does it protect their developing eggs from enemies, it leads to the birth of large, fully formed pups that are literally born to kill. For hundreds of millions of years, animals would remain confined to the Earth's oceans. 370 million years ago, a unique lineage of fish began to move towards land. Called tetrapods, they evolved legs from fins. In time, those legs became sturdy enough to let them move out of the water. But this new world presented new problems.
If you look around today, there are creatures that spend all their time on land. But to do that, you have to have a whole lot of tricks. You have to be able to lay eggs or give birth to live young. If you are laying eggs, your eggs have to be waterproof.
The fish ancestors of tetrapods simply dropped sperm into the current to fertilize eggs. But that wouldn't work on land. So one group of tetrapods, the ancestor of reptiles and mammals, successfully changed their method of reproduction. As sharks had before them, reptiles developed internal fertilization. And then they went beyond, evolving an extraordinary adaptation to protect their young. The amniotic egg. This marvel of evolutionary engineering not only nourished the developing young within, its hard shell kept the egg from drying out. The amniotic egg gave reptiles the ability to conquer land, reproducing, spreading, and growing on a whole different scale. And for the dinosaurs, this scale would be a big problem. When you're 40 feet long and weigh 6 tons, how do you do it? If you can't mate, if you can't pass on your genes, your evolutionary history. But what happens if your own size gets in the way of mating? Some dinosaurs evolved to be the biggest animals ever to live on land. With dinosaurs like T-Rex topping out at more than 15 feet, sex gets complicated. And for all we know about dinosaurs, the details of their sex life remains a mystery.
Imagine a 40-ton dinosaur trying to reproduce. Obviously, 2 of these behemoths would have had to get together, but exactly how they did so is still a huge question for paleontologists.
Fossilized eggs are clear evidence that dinosaurs had intercourse and reproduced through internal fertilization like birds today. And the bones of dinosaurs are littered across all 7 continents, testament to creatures that dominated the Earth for 160 million years. Clearly, these enormous animals must have evolved an extremely successful method of mating. Paleontologist Ken Carpenter has puzzled for years over the mystery of dinosaur reproduction.
It's a whole process of trying to understand what dinosaurs were like as living animals. They had to have been able to reproduce in order to be so successful for over 200 million years. How did the males and females get together?
What made Carpenter's investigation difficult was that all he had was bones. No reproductive organs have survived the fossil record. To discover what dinosaur sex might have been like, Carpenter turned to a creative mix of comparative anatomy, physics, and deduction. Starting with the dinosaur's reptile cousin, the crocodile. Male crocodiles have unique sex organs, not like the claspers of the shark, but not a penis as we humans know it either.
Unlike humans, dogs, cats, they don't have this very long organ that sticks out all the time. It's actually a much smaller organ that's kept inside the body.
Most of the time, the male's genitalia is kept inside a slit on his underbelly called the cloaca. During sex, however, muscles inside the cloaca contract, averting the animal's penis. Just 3 inches long in the 12-foot crocodile, the male must insert this tool into the female's cloaca to deposit his sperm. For creatures the size of dinosaurs, that would be like trying to stick a key in a lock by moving the whole building. Was it possible? To find the answer to that question, Carpenter turned to another present-day creature, one that shares the dinosaur's problem of how to fertilize an internal egg, despite its enormous size. The elephant. To reproduce, the male elephant rears up and leans on the female. But doing so puts a huge amount of weight on her back. Over time, this pressure causes permanent damage, creating small fractures in the female's backbones. If dinosaur sex took the same form, Carpenter should find similar fractures in their fossils.
This vertebrae here comes from a duck-billed dinosaur. Possibly this breakage was due to the male climbing on top of a female during sex. Well, maybe, but we'd have to know what gender this vertebrae is. If it's a male, it would mean one male trying to mate with another male. Maybe that's why dinosaurs became extinct. I don't know.
But the elephant-like rear mount posed a more fundamental problem.
The male would have climbed up, put his weight on her back. Could her bones have supported it?
Elephants weigh up to 7 tons. But some dinosaurs weighed as much as 25 tons. Carpenter calculated the bone strength needed to withstand that much force and concluded that it was too much. The elephant way was out. Undeterred, Carpenter retraced his steps to crocodiles and alligators, creatures with a mating style that avoids load-bearing altogether.
They've got the water to suspend them. It's almost like being in space. The male and females can basically rotate together. The male can stick his penis into the female's cloaca and interject sperm.
So could dinosaurs have had sex underwater? Carpenter consulted the charts.
There were no huge bodies of water, except in a very few places, which would mean then that dinosaurs would have to traipse for sometimes literally thousands of miles in order to have sex. That's an awful lot of work just for sex.
Another dead end. Birds were next. They are the direct descendants of dinosaurs, and they lay eggs like dinosaurs. Could they copulate the same way?
Birds do it basically as a bunch of quickies, mostly because they're trying to fly at the same time as they're trying to reproduce. The males will be fluttering their arms as they're trying to get up against the female.
Birds' quick transfer of sperm, known as a cloacal kiss, would have its advantages for creatures as large as dinosaurs. But again, there are problems. Most dinosaurs don't have wings. And just as importantly, how could they do it with their massive armor in the way? The dinosaur's bony tail is heavy and rigid and not easily moved. The normal procedures of comparative anatomy had left Carpenter with a trail of false leads. Racking his brain for any idea that might work, Carpenter found one right at his feet: the household cat. And while cats are no more like dinosaurs than dogs are like lizards, Carpenter believes the cat's way would work for T-Rex.
If the female lowers herself much like a cat, raises her rear end up, the tail would certainly go up in the air and would expose her sex organ to the male. And the male can then climb up there and grab her on her neck, and then they can go at it.
In the feline position, with the female's head lowered and tail lifted, the problem of the male's enormous weight would be lifted off the female's back. At the same time, the position would allow easy access for the male. Carpenter's theory is the first to offer a workable answer to the mystery of dinosaur sex, and the first to explain how dinosaurs were able to reproduce their way into history as the unrivaled rulers of Earth for 160 million years. Dinosaurs were the largest animals to mate on land. Insects are some of the smallest. And in their tiny world, sex is a war story that's been going on for millions of years, with its own villains and heroes.
You know, when it comes to looking at reproductive biology, you've got to say that cockroaches are a superstar.
65 million years ago, an asteroid 6 miles wide hurtles down from the sky and smashes into the Gulf of Mexico. The impact signals the end of the dinosaur age. Their extinction claims half of all species, turning the Earth into a wasteland. But insects endure. How insects outsurvived so many other animals is still a mystery. Some scientists believe the asteroid's impact caused a temperature shift that put insects into hibernation. When they re-emerged, they flourished, developing new ways to reproduce at staggering rates. But in the insect world, sex is more than just reproducing. It's a battle of the sexes, a war over sperm.
Sperm competition has been extremely important in the evolution and diversification of insects. Males are, of course, competing to make sure their sperm makes it into the female reproductive tract. At the same time, females are able to manipulate which sperm make it to successfully fertilize the egg.
The female seeks multiple sexual partners, giving her offspring a diverse genetic portfolio and a greater chance at survival. But the male seeks to father all the offspring. The more paternity, the better the chances for his genes. What the male wants and the female needs are in conflict, and has spawned an evolutionary arms race, stretching the limits of evolution. A far cry from the shark's simple clasper, insects have evolved the widest variety of penis shapes on the planet. In one of the most shocking, the male damselfly's penis has sharp horns at the tip and spiky thorns down the side. If it looks like a scrub brush, there's a reason. The male uses his tool to scrape out the sperm of his rivals before depositing his own. This technique removes more than 90% of the existing sperm, virtually guaranteeing the offspring will be his. And the males of other insect species take even greater pains to guarantee a return on their deposit.
There's a great strategy that some insects and also some mammals have come up with, which is called a copulatory plug. And after a male mates with a female, some of the semen hardens and becomes a plug, and it prevents other males from being able to mate with the female. It's a pretty good strategy.
But honeybees take it a step further. Not just using a plug, they are the plug. Tens of thousands of male bees compete for the queen. Only one gets to mate with her. Think he's the lucky one? Think again. Upon reaching climax, his penis rips away from his body and becomes stuck inside the queen. He dies in order to lock his sperm inside her. But despite this ultimate sacrifice, female bees evolved a countermeasure, a way to pop out the plug, freeing the female to choose the sperm of another, maybe better mate. In bees, at least, females are winning the sexual arms race. But in other species, the males are taking the lead. In stick insects, males have gone beyond the removable plug, evolving into living chastity belts. They attach to their mates for weeks to prevent any other male from fertilizing her eggs. And the male love bug takes this strategy a radical step further. Once he locks his sex organ inside his partner's, he throws away the key. The male's commitment to the act is total. Once joined, he spends the rest of his life in the act of copulation. After the couple is through mating, he will die, to be dragged around by the female until she lays her eggs. Eggs all fathered by that single male. From species to species, the sexual arms race is ongoing throughout the insect world. But in one familiar group, females may have found a way to finally end the war. Entomologist Ron Harrison heads up the cockroach extermination lab at the Orkin Training Center in Atlanta. To come up with ways to kill these ultimate survivors, Harrison spends his days studying the species most commonly found in homes.
95% of all cockroach problems in urban situations are German cockroaches. They're very quick in their reproductive abilities, and therefore that helps them become resistant to products that we actually use to try to get rid of them.
Evolution has provided cockroaches a host of traits that make them almost impossible to eliminate. They can live a month without food and last hours without oxygen. But most critical to their survival is their speed of reproduction, a quality that might indicate that cockroaches have sex all the time, except they don't.
Once a female has had sex and has that sperm, she's able there to hold it and then fertilize as she needs, rather than have to have sex again.
Because of this one adaptation, the female needs to mate only once to remain pregnant for the rest of her life. Her one act of sex can yield hundreds of thousands of offspring, a remarkable ratio. This benefits the female in more ways than one.
Mating in itself is costly. The more a female mates, the lower her probability of survival. Perhaps because there's some damage that occurs, they might be at risk of predation, and there's even some seminal fluids that carry toxins that decrease female survival.
After her one act of sex, the female carries fertilized eggs with her throughout her entire life. So every female in the colony has the potential to become a colony herself.
In pest control, what's really scary to us then is if you happen to have a German cockroach in the cuff of your pants or in your pocket or in a box that comes from the grocery store and it happens to be a pregnant female, that's all that's needed to get an entire population going.
This adaptation has given the species the ultimate survival advantage.
When you look at the whole evolution of animals, these started out 400 million years ago and are continuing to be very successful. You know, when it comes to looking at reproductive biology, you've got to say that cockroaches are a superstar.
The battle of the sexes has made cockroaches, together with the rest of the insects, the most diverse group of animals on Earth. The drive to reproduce shapes not only insect life, but mammals as well, including us. Everywhere in the natural world, sex gets everyone bent out of shape. Animals will do anything to mate. The drive to pass on genes and ensure survival of the species is so strong that it causes evolutionary changes. This process is called sexual selection.
It's a type of natural selection, but it's the kind of selection for the kind of traits that evolve not to survive another day, but to win at the mating game.
To be successful, in evolutionary terms, your genes have to be in the next generation. As soon as you have sexual reproduction, what you're doing is going out into the environment and looking for other individuals that are doing well and trying to get some of their genes into your offspring. You need to assess how everybody in your population is doing in terms of their reproductive output.
The game of courtship in the animal kingdom is largely typecast. For the most part, males display, females choose.
There's not an animal on this planet in the wild that will copulate with anybody. They all have favorites. Too old, too young, too scruffy, too stupid acting, and they won't do it. And for good reason, because an animal only has a few chances to pass their DNA on into tomorrow. And so they want to do it with the kind of individual that will really enable them to survive.
And females can often have really weird criteria by which they choose which male they're going to mate with. Sexual selection has had huge consequences. Males of a species, they have to compete with each other to find a female. It gives rise to a whole different set of behaviors and appearances in animals to compete with other males and try to get a female mate.
For example, a moose uses its antlers to fight other moose in order to win the opportunity to copulate with certain females. So there's two types of traits that evolve for sexual selection. One are traits simply to fight off members of your own gender, and others are traits to attract the opposite sex.
The pressures of sexual selection worked on the male stalk-eyed fly to compete for the largest eye stalk, on the male finch to sing and to show red, on the rhinoceros beetle to grow massive fighting horns, on the male lion to grow his mane, and on the male giraffe to grow a powerful long neck.
Some forms of sexual selection can actually drive species extinct because the traits that females prefer are so elaborate that they actually get in the way of day-to-day lives of males.
Take the case of the Irish elk, the ancient cousin of Europe's fallow deer.
Females really liked big antlers, and so over time, males with large antlers were selected over males with smaller antlers. Over progressive generations, the average size of antlers in the population got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, the antlers got so big that they were at the very limit of what an animal can sustain and still survive in its environment. And ultimately, the Irish elk went extinct, and a lot of people think that it went extinct because its antlers were just too big.
But even after the rams have butt heads and the mating has begun, in some species, the female has more work to do to be sure the goods are delivered.
The female or the male approach each other, then the male mounts the female. After 1-2 seconds, the female starts calling.
German primatologist Donna Pfefferle works with a unique group of wild macaques who live atop the Rock of Gibraltar. She came here to investigate the mystery of why female macaques cry out so loudly during sex. Over 2 mating seasons, she recorded the macaques, focusing on the frequency and intensity of the females' cries. She then looked for differences between the females who made noise and the females who didn't. What she found was extraordinary. Far more of the noisy females became pregnant.
The earlier, the faster, and with the higher peak frequencies the female calls, the more likely the male is to ejaculate.
In fact, males were 10 times more likely to ejaculate with a calling female than with a silent one. Pfefferle concluded that the females evolved the loud sex noises in a clear case of sexual selection. The noises increase the odds of bearing young.
They're screaming and shouting for a reason. If he doesn't ejaculate, then what's going to happen is she's not going to conceive. So what she's got to do is she's got to encourage him.
Eric Shaw has spent years closely observing the Gibraltar macaques, who are known for one thing: sex. They have sex on average once an hour, and they have evolved to use it for social purposes.
Get him.
No, but we've got free-ranging primates here that we know have been here for 300 years. I know, stop panicking. There's a lot of questions that they can answer for us. Be it a question of how to feed them, or be it a question of sex.
For these primates, sex is part of how the community communicates and bonds.
They use their sexuality in a lot of ways like we do, I suppose. You had a male and a female here, and he threatened her because you're a little bit too close to my food. To stop the threat, she presents herself. In other words, take me, I'm yours. Here we go. That was sheer, total submission and passiveness. She presented herself, I'm not a threat. He decided to go all the way this time and accept her submission. And now there's peace in the world.
The macaque community needs order to keep their elaborate social network intact.
There are little families within families, you know. One female will have 5 children over here, another will have 4 over there, but they need this protection, they need this cohesion, they need to move as a troop.
With primates like macaques, sex moves beyond its primary function and is put to many different uses. The scientists call these behaviors sexual currency.
Primates have developed sexual reproduction to an elaborate art. No longer is it just a physical coming together with no consequences other than reproduction. Now it's the fulcrum of many different aspects of primate societies.
A lot of the primates will exchange food for sex, express power with their sexuality, express friendship with their sexuality. Sex is a very powerful exchange mechanism.
The mix of sex for reproduction and social purposes evolved by primates like the macaque set the stage for the human sexuality that was to come. Humans would add one more most unusual layer to the evolution of sex. Human beings began to emerge as distinct from our primate cousins just a few million years ago.
When our ancestors came down out of the trees and began to stand up on 2 feet instead of 4, they also changed some of their sexual anatomy.
Helen Fisher studies the evolution of human sex.
The female vaginal canal is no longer tipped backwards the way it is among chimpanzees. It evolved to move somewhat forward, probably for easier access during the missionary position.
As the female's anatomy changed, so did the male's. The penis had to reach deeper into the female's body, so it evolved to become significantly larger. Today, humans have the biggest penis of any primate and the most highly developed brain.
I think that human beings made their biggest leap in terms of sexuality with the evolution of the brain.
Over time, the human brain grew large, so large that its hard skull became a threat to successful reproduction.
At some point during human evolution, we began to not only to stand up on 2 feet instead of 4, but the brain got to be too large for the birth canal. At that point, women began to have to bear their babies sooner so that they could get out of the birth canal.
No one knows how long the first human mothers carried their young. But we do know that today, a 21-month pregnancy would be necessary for a human baby to be born as fully developed as a newborn chimp. With every human born essentially premature, family bonds became a necessity for survival of the species. And that necessity, argues Fisher, explains the mystery of love.
As we evolved babies that would have a very long childhood and even adolescence, we began to need to sustain a partnership with somebody long-term. And thus we see the evolution of these romantic love and deep attachment to a partner.
Fisher studies the specific areas of the brain involved in sex and love. Inside an MRI machine, subjects are directed to think about their lover by looking at his or her photograph. As they do, their MRI lights up with regions of intense activity. An entire brain system devoted to love.
By 2 million years ago, we began to build this very large cortex. And then suddenly, sex and mind became interconnected. These brain systems for the sex drive and for romantic love are woven deep into primitive parts of the human brain.
Humans forever changed sex with the evolution of love. And now, humans are going a step further, taking our evolution into our own hands and separating it from the act of sex.
Sex has become futuristic. There's all kinds of ways now to basically bypass sex. We can clone individuals in a petri dish. There's all sorts of ways to fertilize individuals without engaging in intercourse.
What is occurring today is that biology is beginning to manipulate those processes to alter its own self and to take control of its own future evolution. So it's becoming a very conscious thing, and 100 years, 200 years from now, as we move forward, the process of human evolution is going to be directed by human choice.
Gregory Stock is a biophysicist and the author of a book entitled Redesigning Humans. He is an advocate of human genetic engineering.
And I could see a time when it's viewed as just kind of careless to conceive of children by the old ways, where it's just some random meeting of egg and sperm. How could you be so careless about something as important as a child?
Stock believes the logical first step will be genetic screening, a process in which couples will be able to bring their sperm and egg together in the lab to generate multiple embryos. Then pick the one with the most desirable traits.
So I think it'll be the parents will make choices about their children that are a little bit different from themselves, but really resonate with their own personalities. If they're really outgoing, they'll want children that are outgoing. If they're really conscious about their own intelligence, they'll choose kids that have a little leg up in that realm. If they're really athletic, they're going to want an athlete. And I see an enormous diversity as we go out into the future.
We already are living in the age of engineered reproduction. The first so-called test tube baby is now in her 30s. Successfully cloned animals include the mouse, sheep, cattle, cat, horse, and chimp. Theoretically, the technology to clone humans exists, but hasn't yet been used. For Stock, a future of engineered humanity would simply be a new phase in evolution, consciousness having evolved to the point where it can chart its own future.
As you begin to have meaningful choices, things that can be done that people consider to be of value, for instance, a genetic screening so that you can be absolutely certain that your child is going to be very, very healthy, then I think you're going to get these technologies used in a very, very broad fashion.
Natural selection has made some bad choices in the past. An awful lot of people have very bad backs. They've got bad shoulders. They pull out various parts of the body because it's not yet perfectly evolved. And if we could make some changes in selection so that we get rid of genetic diseases, it would be an improvement.
As humans move to take the reins of their own reproductive evolution, a vital debate has begun.
Genetic engineering in humans is a very risky activity. The problem is that by introducing variation, we might not know what all the consequences will be. We may insert a gene that we think causes one effect, but in fact it will cause other effects and disrupt the normal functioning of our chromosomes.
Of course there are going to be problems. There are always problems with using technology, especially potent technology. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't go there. It's going to be a very messy, a very chaotic, a very unpredictable process. And to me, it's just the next stage of evolution.
Taken to its logical extreme, in the future, the act of sex may have no place in human life at all. But for most scientists, the thought that the human animal would drop a behavior that is the product of millions of years of evolution is highly remote.
Genetic engineering is far from the end of sexual reproduction. We're far from evolving beyond sex. I don't think that's ever going to happen.
As long as there is life, it seems there will be sex.